They thought they knew you. They thought they had you pinned, cornered, already rehearsed in their story. To them, the ending was written before the scene even began. They laid out the snare, tightened the ropes, positioned every detail with confidence so inflated it looked unshakable. In their minds, you weren't a person with vision, wisdom, or discernment. You were a character to be played, a pawn to be placed exactly where they wanted. They confused your quiet observation with blindness. They mistook your restraint as absence, and that arrogance became the crack in their foundation. Think about it. When someone convinces themselves you are too naive to notice, they drop their guard. They let the mask slip, even if only for a fraction of a second. A flicker in their eyes, a sudden tremor in their tone, the pause between rehearsed words. They may think the world missed it, but you didn't. You felt it in the air before you even understood it in your mind. That's the gift. That's the edge. Your silence isn't stupidity. It's the gathering of signals, the storing of details, the building of a map no one else can see. Picture a stage with bright lights overhead. They set that stage thinking you would stumble, blinded, unable to catch your balance. But what they didn't expect was for you to flip the spotlight back on them. Suddenly, the script they wrote so confidently started to fall apart. Every line that once felt polished began to sound hollow. Every move that once looked calculated now looked sloppy. Because deception only thrives in the dark. Once exposed to the light, even the grandest performance looks cheap. That's what you did. You turned their flawless plan into a spectacle of errors. And isn't it almost poetic? They rehearsed your collapse. They celebrated it before it even happened. Yet the only collapse that occurred was their facade. Your stillness, your refusal to panic, was the mirror that reflected their lies back to them. In that reflection, they saw not your downfall, but their own fragility. They called you soft clay, easy to mold, but what they didn't realize is that fire had already hardened you into stone. Their confidence wasn't real, it was theater. Their certainty wasn't rooted, it was smoke. And when you didn't play your role, the illusion shattered. Here's the deeper truth. Confidence built on deception always collapses. It might look steady for a season, but when met with authentic awareness, it cracks instantly. You didn't need stacks of evidence. You didn't need a courtroom of witnesses. All you needed was to trust the nudge inside you, the inner whisper that said, "Wait, something doesn't add up." That whisper has saved you more times than you even know. That whisper is why the traps keep failing, why their perfect setups keep backfiring. Because when your intuition speaks, you listen. And when you listen, no scheme can hold you. And now, look at them. Once so sure, now fumbling. Once triumphant, now silent. That silence isn't peace, it's panic. They're replaying every detail, every gesture, every fake smile, wondering which piece gave them away. They're furious, not just because you saw through it, but because you saw before they even launched. That's what burns them. To be exposed before the curtain rises. To realize the chosen one didn't stumble, didn't fall, didn't even flinch. You stood there steady, unbothered, as their illusion dissolved around them. So remember this. Their certainty was never about you. It was projection, a fragile attempt to control what they couldn't. And when control slipped, so did their story. They thought they wrote the script of your downfall. Instead, they revealed the script of their own arrogance. And you, without even trying, became the critic who shut the play down before the first act was over. That is the illusion of certainty. That is why they rage now. Because their confidence was smoke, their power was theater, and you, through silence, through stillness, made all of it collapse under its own weight. There's a certain kind of strength people never see coming. It doesn't shout. It doesn't rush. It doesn't even move in ways most would call aggressive. That strength is patience. And patience, in the hands of someone awake, is sharper than any blade. Your enemies mistook it for weakness. They saw your silence and thought it meant submission. They watched your calm and convinced themselves it meant you were clueless. But they failed to realize patience isn't the absence of power. It's the gathering of it. Picture this. A hunter doesn't fire at the rustle in the bushes. They wait. They listen. They let the sound become clear, let the shape reveal itself. That waiting isn't hesitation, it's precision. You carried that same energy, while they moved recklessly, stitching together lies, building their perfect trap. You weren't scrambling to stop them. You were cataloging their every move. You were stacking evidence they didn't know they were leaving behind. That restraint turned their performance into confession. And here's what unsettles them most. You didn't stop them too early. If you had, they would have spun it. They would have painted you dramatic, paranoid, unstable. You know the routine. They thrive on making others look like the problem. But your patience denied them that opportunity. You let the web complete itself. You let them tie every knot, connect every thread, until their entire design became undeniable. Exposure isn't real until the scheme is complete. You knew that, and so you waited. Doesn't it sting them now? They spent so much energy crafting the illusion, smug in the belief that you were blind. But patience is a mirror, and when you held it steady, they revealed themselves. They thought they had time. They thought they still had control. And then one move from you, one word, one simple decision, and the whole structure collapsed. That collapse wasn't messy, it wasn't chaotic. It was clean, surgical, the kind of strike that leaves no recovery, no maybe, no denial. That's why they're panicking. Not because you fought them head-on, but because you dismantled them with silence. Imagine a courtroom with no witnesses, just one voice saying, "I know." No arguments, no raised volume, just calm recognition. That's what your patience sounded like. It was enough to convict them without you lifting a hand. They thought they were weaving a trap for you, but you knew from the beginning it was a net for themselves. That's the beauty of letting arrogance breathe. It suffocates on its own. And now they sit in the aftermath, furious. Furious because they thought patience meant paralysis. Furious because you never gave them the satisfaction of panic. Furious because you turned their own timing against them. They walked into their downfall believing they had the upper hand, only to find out you had already counted every step they would take. So remember this. Your silence wasn't ignorance. Your waiting wasn't hesitation. It was strategy. The kind of strategy only people forged by experience can carry. You've been through enough storms to know when to move and when to let the wind expose what people are hiding. And in this storm, you chose stillness. That stillness became your shield, your sword, your proof. Patience is a weapon, not because it avoids conflict, but because it makes the enemy collapse under their own weight. And that's exactly what happened. You didn't chase them. You didn't wrestle with their lies. You let them finish the story, and in doing so, you let them write their own ending. The very rope they thought would bind you became the noose they wrapped around themselves. And now they're gasping, not from your attack, but from their own arrogance backfiring. Here's the fatal miscalculation your enemies made. They didn't set a trap for the person you are right now. They built it for the version of you that no longer exists. They studied your history, not your growth. They strategized against your scars, not your healing. They thought they knew your weaknesses, but what they were really working with was expired data, old blueprints from a house you've already torn down and rebuilt. Picture a thief trying to unlock a door with a key you threw away years ago. They slip it into the lock, twist with confidence, only to find the mechanism has changed. That's what happened here. They designed their scheme for the one who used to ignore red flags, the one who explained away disrespect, the one who tolerated crumbs in the name of love. They rehearsed their play for the you who once begged to be understood, the you who confused sacrifice with survival. But that version, gone, buried, outgrown. What they didn't see was the transformation. Pain became your teacher. Betrayal became your training ground. Every knife in your back became a lesson in discernment. You stopped needing their approval. You stopped seeking their validation. You learned to walk away from what no longer served you, even when it hurt, even when it felt like losing everything. And that shift, that's what turned their perfect trap into a perfect failure. Doesn't it sting them to realize the door they thought would swing wide open stayed locked, unbothered, unmoved? They knocked with sweet words. They rang the bell with fake loyalty. They whispered familiar promises, thinking they could pull you back into old cycles. But you didn't flinch. You didn't answer, because you're not living there anymore. They were fighting a ghost, chasing a shadow, trying to ensnare someone who no longer breathes in this chapter of your life. And here's the irony that burns them most. It was their past betrayals that trained you for this moment. The very pain they inflicted became the armor that blocked their latest attack. The very tears they caused became the clarity that revealed their lies. They thought they were breaking you back then, but all they were doing was building the strength that dismantled them now. Every insult, every manipulation, every silent dismissal, they forged a resilience they could never predict. And now they're choking on the realization that they made you unstoppable. Imagine standing in front of a mirror, expecting to see the same reflection, but instead finding someone unrecognizable. That's what they faced when they tried to corner you. They approached with a script written for yesterday's character, only to find the stage occupied by someone new, someone sharper, calmer, stronger, unwilling to play along. And that dissonance left them furious, because nothing enrages a deceiver more than realizing the role they wrote for you no longer fits. This is why the trap collapsed before it even closed. They thought they had your patterns memorized. They thought they knew exactly how you'd react. But you didn't panic. You didn't beg. You didn't fall apart. You stood still, with a strength they didn't see coming, and that stillness told them everything. The old you is gone. The version they preyed on has vanished. And what stands in front of them now isn't prey at all. It's a force that cannot be cornered. So let this truth sink deep. Every time they attack you with old tactics, it's proof of how far you've come. Their failure to recognize your growth is their downfall. They prepared for yesterday. They underestimated today. And that gap between who you were and who you've become, that's the grave their arrogance dug for them. They thought your scars would still bleed. They dug through your past like thieves, searching for old bullets, convinced they could reload them and fire again. Childhood pain, broken trust, insecurities, those mistakes you made before you knew better, they gathered it all like ammunition, rehearsing the same triggers they once used to control you. To them, your history wasn't history. It was a weapon they believed would never dull. But what they failed to realize is that you've already melted those bullets down. Every wound they inflicted, every betrayal you endured, every heartbreak that once left you trembling, none of it stayed raw. You forged armor from it. You took what was meant to destroy you and reshaped it into protection. That's why when they pressed on those same old scars, nothing happened. No reaction, no collapse, just silence. Not the silence of weakness, but the silence of someone who has already healed. Picture a hacker trying to break into a system with an old password. They're certain it will work, smug as they type it in. But the operating system has been upgraded. The lock has been changed. That's you. They came with outdated codes, not realizing you rebuilt the entire framework of who you are. They thought pressing on abandonment would make you cling. They thought throwing guilt would make you plead. They thought whispering shame would make you shrink. But none of it landed, because you don't run on those old programs anymore. And doesn't it sting them now? They expected tears but saw stillness. They expected arguments but met composure. They expected you to spiral into the same chaos they left you in years ago, but instead you stood calm, steady, even compassionate in your silence. That kind of response is what rattled them most. Because manipulators don't fear anger, they feed on it. What they fear is peace. The peace that says, I know what you're doing, and it has no hold on me. Your past was supposed to define you. That's the story they rehearsed. They wanted to keep you frozen in old pain, trapped in cycles you've already broken. But here's the brutal truth for them. Your healing disarmed their entire arsenal. Every scar they tried to weaponize became proof of their failure. They thought wounds made you fragile. In reality, wounds made you unbreakable. Imagine a battlefield where the soldier shows up, wearing armor crafted from every cut the enemy once inflicted. That's your presence now. You don't deny the pain happened. You don't pretend the scars aren't there. You simply refuse to let them be used against you. The same history they mocked you for became the fortress they can't penetrate. So now they sit in fury, realizing their strategy collapsed before it even began. They prepared for the fragile version of you that no longer exists. They came armed with your past, only to find you holding it as armor. And that's the paradox they can't swallow. The very pain they caused you is what now protects you from them. That's why they're burning with anger, because their weapons turn to ash in your hands, because every attempt to reopen old wounds only revealed how deeply you've healed, and because the game they once won with ease is now impossible to play. Your wounds became your armor, and that armor is the quiet evidence that no trap built on yesterday's pain can ever cage the person you are today. Here's the part that twists the knife for them. You didn't just expose the people standing in front of you, you saw the hands pulling their strings. That's the level of awareness they never prepared for. They assumed you'd waste your energy wrestling with pawns, arguing with surface-level betrayals, drowning in the noise of petty distractions. But you refused to stay at the surface. You traced patterns. You followed timing. You noticed the eerie familiarity in their words, the uncanny repetition in their actions, and that led you straight to the source. Imagine a chessboard full of pawns advancing, each piece moving with perfect rhythm. Most players panic, flustered by the sheer number of attacks. But not you. You tilted the board. You stopped staring at the pawns and looked up straight into the eyes of the one directing the game. That moment shifted everything, because once the puppeteer is exposed, the puppets lose their power. Doesn't it unsettle them now? To realize you weren't fooled by the actors, because you already saw the director. They thought their timing was flawless. They thought coincidences would cover their tracks. They believed planting the same narrative in different mouths would make it look organic. But you picked up the fingerprints. You caught the way stories arrived too neatly aligned, the way people popped up at just the right time with rehearsed concern or practiced outrage, too clean, too polished, too scripted. That precision gave away the blueprint, and you read it like an open book. And here's the sting. You didn't react the way most would. You didn't thrash. You didn't try to convince every pawn of the truth. You let them play their roles while you quietly studied the strings. That calm dismantled the entire operation, because puppets don't know they're puppets until someone points to the hand above them. And when you did, the whole performance started unraveling. What terrifies them now is not that you survived, it's that you saw. Because once you've glimpsed the mechanism behind the curtain, you can't unsee it. Their schemes stop being shocking and start looking predictable. Their attacks stop being personal and start looking programmed. And nothing weakens a manipulator faster than realizing their unique tactics are nothing more than recycled tricks. Picture a magician on stage, dazzling the crowd with illusions. But you're not gasping with awe, you're sitting calmly in your seat, already aware of every hidden wire, every smoke screen, every false compartment. The trick loses power when the secret is exposed. That's exactly what happened. You robbed their betrayal of its magic. You revealed the mechanics. And once the mechanics are exposed, the illusion collapses. Now they're left scrambling, not because their pawns failed, but because you leapt past the pawns altogether. You aimed straight for the mind behind the moves. That's why their fury is louder now. It's not just humiliation, it's terror. Because if you could see this, what else have you seen? What other hidden hands have you noticed that they thought were invisible? This is the paranoia eating them alive. They wonder what else you know, what else you've stored, what else you've decoded, and that paranoia is worse than any confrontation, because enemies can fight noise, but they can't fight silence. They can argue with accusations, but they can't argue with awareness. Your clarity is the weapon they can't disarm. So remember this, you didn't just sidestep a trap, you dismantled the entire system behind it, and that's what breaks them. Because when pawns lose their puppeteer, they stop moving. And the ones who thought they were in control now sit exposed, stripped of their strings, trembling under the weight of your awareness. They thought they were flawless actors. Every smile rehearsed, every gesture polished, every word delivered with just enough sugar to mask the venom underneath. To outsiders, the performance looked seamless. To strangers, they seemed trustworthy. They wore the role of victim when it suited them, hero when it got them applause, loyal friend when they needed your guard down. But what they never expected was that you weren't just watching their play, you had already read the script. Picture yourself seated in a theater. The crowd gasps at every twist, clutching their chests at every betrayal, whispering about how convincing the actors are. But you sit there calm, almost bored, because you already know the ending. That's the position you carried. While everyone else was caught in the illusion, you were watching for the slips, the pause before the next line, the crack in the actor's voice, the moment their mask shifted when the lights hit too hard. And here's the truth that terrifies them. You didn't need physical proof. You didn't need a confession or a pile of evidence. Your discernment was the rehearsal the universe gave you before the curtain even rose. Your intuition screamed the truth long before their mouths confirmed it. So, you let them act. You gave them the stage, the spotlight, the audience they craved. You didn't interrupt. You didn't expose them too early. You let the play unfold until their own lines betrayed them. Doesn't it sting them now? They thought they still held your attention. They believed their performance had you hooked, waiting for their approval, desperate for their validation. But you had already clocked out. You were detached, watching from the balcony while they sweated under the lights. That detachment was your secret weapon. It left them furious because when the final scene came, when the betrayal hit its peak, you didn't cry, you didn't rage, you didn't even clap, you just walked away. Imagine that. They wrote you into their story as the victim, the weak character destined to crumble in Act 3. But instead, you exited as the critic, the one who closed the play with a single line, "I see everything." That one truth stripped their masterpiece bare. Because what destroys a liar faster than exposure is indifference, and your calm indifference was the real verdict. Here's the brutal reality for them. They invested everything into this performance. They rehearsed, schemed, timed it perfectly, yet all of it collapsed under the weight of one thing. They couldn't predict you. You didn't follow the script they wrote. You didn't respond on cue. You didn't deliver the breakdown they wanted as the climax. Your stillness ruined the finale, and now their entire theater is in ashes. So remember this. Manipulators fear silence more than accusations. They fear discernment more than arguments. Because when you've already read the script, the performance is powerless. That's why their rage is burning now, not because you disrupted the play, but because you ended it without ever lifting your voice. Their theater of lies became their undoing, and you, without fanfare, walked out of the audience and left them performing for no one. They mistook your stillness for fear. They saw your calm expression, your measured silence, and assumed you were frozen, paralyzed, waiting to be devoured. But stillness is not surrender. It is strategy in disguise. You weren't panicking. You were calculating. You weren't running. You were waiting. And when the right moment came, you struck with precision so clean it left them breathless. Picture this. A snake gliding through tall grass, its body swaying, tongue flicking, eyes fixed on its prey. Most people panic when they see it. They flail. They flee. But the wise hunter knows you don't strike at the first movement. You let the snake glide closer, closer, until one decisive swing cuts it clean. That's the essence of your approach. While they spun lies and whispered behind your back, you didn't expose them too soon. You logged details. You tracked connections. You let them believe they were tightening the net, when in truth, they were wrapping themselves in their own rope. Doesn't it sting them now? They wanted you emotional. They wanted you frantic. They counted on you exploding in anger, making their job easier. But instead, you sharpened your awareness. You let the betrayal crawl closer until denial was impossible. And then, with one calm move, the entire scheme collapsed. No theatrics, no chaos, just clarity cutting through deception. That's what terrifies them. Not the exposure itself, but the timing. Because they thought they still had control. They thought they still had time. They believed they could keep slithering, weaving, wrapping you tighter until escape seemed impossible. But you weren't trapped. You were waiting. And when the strike landed, it was final. No recovery, no escape. The game ended in one motion. Imagine the humiliation of realizing the prey you hunted was never prey at all, but a predator more precise than you. That's the position they're in now. The snake doesn't fear noise, it fears accuracy. And that's what you carried. Accuracy that comes from patience. Accuracy that comes from knowing when to act and when to let silence do the work. And here's the deeper truth. Your calm didn't just save you, it dismantled them. They expected a fight they could manipulate, a storm they could point at and say, "See, that's the real them." Instead, you denied them the chaos. You gave them peace. And peace, wielded with strategy, is sharper than any outburst. So now they sit in fury, not just because you survived, but because you dismantled everything in seconds. Their entire setup, months of planning, rehearsals and whispered lies, undone by a single decisive move. And the thought that keeps them awake at night is this: if you could do this once, you could do it again. If you caught this scheme, what other schemes will you catch before they even begin? That paranoia is the venom eating them alive. Let this truth echo. Stillness is not weakness. Calm is not ignorance. Silence is not surrender. They are the sharpening of the blade, the gathering of power, the steady breath before the strike. And when the strike comes, it doesn't miss. That's why they're furious, not just because they lost, but because they never saw the hunter hiding in your stillness. They believed your silence would protect them forever. They counted on your kindness to act as a muzzle, your loyalty to chain your tongue, your fear of judgment to keep the truth buried. To them, your quiet wasn't just convenient, it was their cover, their shield, their greatest weapon, because as long as you stayed silent, they could keep performing. They could keep wearing the mask, manipulating the story, hiding their intent. But silence is a double-edged sword. It can protect, yes, but it can also suffocate. And there comes a moment when silence is no longer patience, no longer strategy. It becomes complicity. That realization is what cracked everything open inside you. You understood that keeping their secrets wasn't kindness, it was imprisonment, and you refused to carry their crimes on your back any longer. Picture a mask someone wears to hide their ugliness. For years, they've leaned on you to hold that mask in place. They depended on your unwillingness to speak, your desire to avoid conflict, your soft heart that always said, "It's not worth the trouble." But the truth has a way of building pressure, and when you finally let it out, it doesn't explode, it slices. Clean, final, irrefutable. And doesn't it terrify them now? The very thing they relied on, your silence, became the blade that cut them down. You didn't scream, you didn't rage, you didn't make a spectacle. You spoke calmly, clearly, decisively. And in that calm, their whole facade unraveled. Because truth doesn't need volume to dismantle lies. It just needs air. They bet everything on your softness. They thought loyalty would keep you locked. They assumed guilt would keep you swallowing what you knew. They believed the prison of silence would hold you forever. But transformation shifts everything. At some point, you chose truth over comfort, justice over pretending, clarity over peacekeeping, and that choice stripped them bare. Imagine standing in a room full of mirrors. For years, they believed every mirror reflected the image they wanted. Then one day, you shattered the glass. Suddenly, their real face was revealed from every angle. That's what your voice did. It revealed them. No more hiding, no more twisting. Their image cracked the moment your silence broke. Here's the brutal reality. They never feared anger. They feared exposure. They weren't worried about you screaming, they were worried about you speaking. Because anger can be dismissed as emotional. But truth, spoken with calm precision, leaves no exit. That's why their fury burns hotter now. Not because you destroyed their image, but because you let the truth do it for you. And doesn't it feel liberating to finally refuse to protect those who never protected you? To step out of the prison of silence and realize your voice was the key all along. That shift is why their schemes collapsed. Because the moment you stopped shielding them with your silence, their world fell apart. So remember this. Kindness does not mean complicity. Loyalty does not mean silence. And peace at the expense of truth is no peace at all. They thought your silence would last forever. Instead, it became the very thing that ended them. Your voice, calm and steady, became their undoing. And now, every word you've spoken echoes louder than the lies they rehearsed. They wanted sparks. They wanted chaos. They wanted you to break under pressure so they could point and say, "See, that's the real them." Every jab was designed to provoke. Every staged humiliation was crafted to draw you out. They pressed on old scars, whispered insults laced with venom, even engineered situations just to catch you snapping. Their entire trap wasn't just about deceiving you, it was about baiting you into self-destruction. But here's where their plan collapsed. You didn't give them the reaction, you didn't explode, you didn't hand them the ammunition they were waiting for. Instead, You gave them peace. And peace, in the face of provocation, is the sharpest counterattack of all. Imagine someone jabbing at a power outlet, expecting sparks to fly, only to find the wires have been cut. That's what you became. They thought they knew your triggers, but healing had already unplugged them. What once set you ablaze now barely touched you. What once cracked you wide open now rolled off your shoulders like water, and that calm infuriated them more than any outburst ever could. Doesn't it sting them? They were banking on your explosion, rehearsing how they'd use your reaction as proof. But your stillness flipped the script. Their mask began to slip under the weight of your silence. Their tone sharpened, their words tangled, their body language betrayed them. The spotlight they had positioned to expose you turned back on them. Suddenly, the performance wasn't sustainable without your chaos to fuel it. Without your reaction, their act began to collapse. This is the irony they can't swallow. They mistook your peace for weakness, but your peace was the very trap they fell into. Because peace doesn't just keep you steady, it reveals who others really are when their games stop working. And now, their fury isn't just embarrassment, it's the agony of knowing they can't provoke you anymore. They lost the only weapon they thought they had. Picture this. A storm raging, winds howling, lightning flashing, and in the center of it, a calm eye, unmoved, unshaken. That's you. You didn't deny the storm existed. You didn't pretend it wasn't real. You simply refused to be tossed around by it. That refusal became your strength, and that strength is what shattered their illusion. So here's the truth they'll never admit. The trap wasn't designed to destroy you with lies. It was designed to make you destroy yourself through reaction. But you starved the trap of its oxygen. You gave it nothing to feed on. And in that refusal you reversed the entire game. They unraveled, not you. Their mask fell, not yours. Their fury burned hotter because their plan depended on your collapse, and instead, your calm became their exposure. That's why they're enraged now. Because peace, when wielded by someone healed, isn't passive, it's revolutionary. And you wielded it with precision. They thought the ending was locked. They thought they held the pen, the stage, the spotlight. In their minds, the betrayal was scripted, the collapse inevitable. They had the timing, the whispers, the rehearsed breakdown scene they wanted you to play. Every detail was arranged so perfectly that they celebrated before the curtain even rose. To them, this was the masterpiece, the grand finale where you fell apart, and they walked away victorious. But then the script slipped out of their hands. Right when the scene was supposed to climax in your defeat, something shifted. The universe stepped in. Doors they swore were locked swung wide open. Allies they thought they controlled began to question the narrative. The chaos they planted to break you became the soil that grew your clarity. The fire meant to burn you down only refined you into something stronger, brighter, untouchable. Their story didn't end with your downfall, it ended with their exposure. Picture this, a movie where the villain controls every frame, every scene going their way. Then halfway through, the reel changes. Suddenly, every twist works against them. The same tools they use to trap the hero become the weapons that destroy their empire. That's exactly what happened. Their perfect trap didn't just fail, it turned into a stage for their humiliation. And doesn't it burn them now? The spotlight they built to blind you now shines on their contradictions. The whispers they spread echo back as evidence. The alliances they staged crumble under scrutiny. What was supposed to bury you became the mirror that reflected their corruption. They called it a setup. The universe called it a reversal. And no deceiver, no manipulator, no architect of traps can outmaneuver divine timing. Here's the truth that keeps them awake. They weren't just defeated by you, they were defeated by a higher order they can't touch. They thought you were a character in their play. They forgot you walk with a purpose that no human script can rewrite. Every scheme they plotted became receipts of their own deception. Every lie they rehearsed became the rope that tied their hands. And you walked out, not bitter, not broken, but elevated. Imagine standing on the very stage, built for your humiliation. But instead of collapsing, you rise, calm, clear, radiant. The crowd sees not your downfall, but their fraud. That reversal is what enrages them most. Not just that you survived, but that you thrived. Not just that you escaped, but that you transformed. Their so-called masterpiece became their downfall, and your resilience became the headline. So let this truth steady you. The script was never theirs to finish. The universe always had the final word, and when divine order flips the narrative, no scheme can prosper. What they intended for harm became proof of your elevation. What they thought would silence you became the testimony of your strength. Their perfect trap became the perfect mirror, and in that reflection, their mask fell for everyone to see. That's why they're furious. Because the story didn't end the way they wrote it. It ended the way truth demanded. And in that ending, you didn't just win, you redefined what victory looks like. Now breathe. Let the weight of everything you've walked through settle in a different way, not as a burden, but as proof. Proof that every trap, every lie, every betrayal was never greater than your discernment, your growth, your alignment. Proof that silence can be power, that patience can be strategy, that peace can be a weapon sharper than rage. Look back at the road that brought you here. You didn't just survive, you learned. You didn't just endure, you transformed. And in that transformation, their fury makes sense. Because what they built to crush you only clarified who you truly are. They called it a trap, but you now see it as training, a stage where your strength revealed itself under pressure. And doesn't that change everything? To know that what was meant to humiliate you actually elevated you. To realize that you carry armor forged from wounds, eyes sharpened by deception, a spirit that refuses to collapse under weight. That's not weakness, that's mastery. That's divine alignment at work in your story. So tonight, let the rage of your enemies confirm the victory of your spirit. Let their confusion remind you of your clarity. Let their unraveling be the evidence of your stability. You are not defined by the traps they set. You are defined by the way you walk free from them, calm and unshaken. And here's where I leave you, not with noise, but with reflection. Keep your silence when it matters. Break it when it liberates. Trust the shift in the air long before actions confirm it. You are not prey in their story. You are the one rewriting the ending. If this resonated with you, take a moment, drop a quiet 77 in the comments. Not for me, but as your own declaration. I see through illusions, I trust my vision, and I cannot be fooled. Carry that with you, walk with it, and know this. Every trap they set becomes another stage where the truth will always find its way through.